Welcome back to News in Focus. Now, the public were concerned. The public were in a state of panic when, of course, the VAT increase, which was supposed to kick off on the 1st of May, would have been implemented. But alas, National Treasury just yesterday at midnight had said that they will be scrapping it and that Minister of Finance, Nongwana, will soon implement measures to reverse this controversial hike, which was supposed to kick in at the start of next month. Now, National Treasury announced on Wednesday that the minister will shortly introduce the rates and monetary amounts, an amendment of Revenue Laws Bill, which proposes to maintain the value-added tax at 15% from the start of next month. Joining me now, I'd like to welcome economic and political analyst Khaya Sithole. Khaya, thank you so much for joining us here on News in Focus on Hilaal TV.
Thank you and good morning.
Yeah. Khaya, would I be exaggerating when I said this is a almighty mess, isn't it? Because this is just not a simple case of saying, well, let's just scrap the tax. This now needs to go through a parliamentary process, which does take quite a lot of time.
Yeah, I think it's impossible to exaggerate how bizarre this entire fiasco has been. So what we do know now is that the minister has indeed sent through to Parliament his new bill, and this new bill obviously tries to undo what the previous bill that's already been voted on essentially did. So what then can happen is that if by some miracle, Parliament is able to assemble itself over the next couple of days and then entertain this bill and then ultimately agree on it, only then it will become effective. My fear is that just because the minister has said that he's changed his mind and just because there was a parade of political parties claiming that all is well yesterday doesn't actually mean that anything substantive has happened, because we do need to figure out what are the processes that are necessary to get us there. And historically, the processes around ratifying bills and ultimately getting them to become binding law are not an overnight process. And even though this will go through the money bills section, which is much faster than the other sections of the Constitution, it's still not an overnight process. There must be a public consultation, which is definitely not going to happen before the first. So I'm worried about the idea that's been sold that the problem has been solved. I absolutely do not believe that the problem has been solved.
Right, Khaya, let's scrap off today. Today is not going to happen, right? It's done. There's now the 29th of April and the 30th of April. Surely this just can't be done within a matter of 48 hours. It's nigh and impossible, which now makes this, and even though you're saying the money bills process could take quite a quick turnaround, it's just not going to happen as fast as maybe the public is assuming it to happen.
Yeah, so there are two processes actually. There is the process that he has started today, which is a process of a new bill. So this bill is not contingent on what's happened before. You can regard it as a new bill. This new bill is unfortunately a bill that again requires not only public consultations, but also the committees that apparently got us into trouble in the first place. They have to debate this, and then finally the National Assembly must debate it. And then after the National Assembly is done with it, does it only go to the National Council of Provinces? So even if we're dealing with the new bill altogether, we have significant time constraints, which quite simply make it impossible for this to be the law by the 1st of May 2025. On the other hand, you then have the more difficult question of, well, what happens to the bill that's already been through the process? Is this the bill that he simply can unilaterally withdraw? And because it's already gone beyond his hands, so as you can understand that he, as a minister, introduces a bill to Parliament and then Parliament's committees take over. That's what they did. And then the National Assembly adopted. So now it's a business of the National Assembly and the National Council of Provinces until it ultimately gets assented to. So the question of whether the minister even has the ability to simply say, I've changed my mind about that bill, so therefore it no longer exists, is still unclear to us. So at this point in time, I don't know if anything significant has actually happened in the past couple of days, except for the statement that says that we think we were wrong, or rather we want you to do this thing differently.
Yeah, what makes it complicated, he was, of course, in Washington this week when it came to the G20 finance summit that was happening there. Now, Khaya, a lot of this has come through, of course, this court case that was brought by the DA and the EFF this week. And again, we've had these public holidays, we've had these long weekends, which has, of course, slowed down anything. You've got, of course, the potential of this being an out-of-court settlement between the DA and the ANC. Let's put that to the side. Was the hand being forced on the ANC coming from this actual court case, given that, as we discussed right now, yesterday was the 24th, it's now the 25th today, this turnaround time is going to take quite a long period of time. How much of a role did that court case really play in saying, well, we should really now change our mind with regards to this?
Well, I think that court case is the single most defining moment of all of this, because you have to distinguish between the court case of the DA and the EFF, which I'll get to shortly, versus the rhetoric of the other political parties. What the other political parties want us to believe is that less than a month ago, they decided to agree to a framework, a document that says that the VAT rate must be 0.5%, and they claim that they agreed to it on the basis that National Treasury was going to come up with alternatives within a 30-day period. Well, they haven't come up with a single alternative, so there's absolutely no basis for them to say they've done their job and they've delivered us to nirvana, because there's absolutely no such thing. And in the absence of them telling us what these new alternatives that they said we're going to take 30 days to canvass, and then for us to say, oh, yes, we can see why these new alternatives cover the gap that the minister is trying to deal with, you then end up with a contradiction, because the minister says, yes, I'm going to do this, but I've got a 75 billion rand gap. So I'm thinking, well, they said to us in 30 days, they'll find alternatives to the VAT, and only then should the VAT be scrapped. The VAT has been scrapped. They haven't found alternatives, so you've got a big gap. So I don't think we can celebrate anything that they've done, because it just doesn't get us anywhere. On the other hand, what you saw with that particular court case is that it dealt with two key issues. The first one was the issue of the procedural steps that the committees undertook when they were ventilating the previous bill, and apparently there were particular flaws then, but probably that's not a long-term problem. The bigger problem is the question of whether the minister should have the type of power that he currently has to unilaterally amend an act and then Parliament acts after the fact. And I think for me, that is a case that must be resolved. And also, quite interestingly, even the DA that took the case, it took it on one of the issues. There's actually at least 4 issues in our Income Tax Act in particular that are subject to the same thing. So if the minister wanted to change personal income tax rates tomorrow, he can actually do it and follow the same processes, and only then will the other parties realize that, oops, he seems to have too much powers there already, so let's go and deal with it. So there's too many things that are not happening at the right pace, and there's too many contradictions, but I don't think that the issue has been solved.
One final question. Obviously, from a legislative perspective, there's 2 days that Parliament has. I think we can both agree that it's going to be, again, impossible for this thing to just be changed overnight. Is there parts of the Constitution that can allow for a potential delay given the magnitude of what is currently happening at this moment? Can we look back at the Constitution and say, okay, let's try and see if there's a possibility, or are we just clutching ourselves on straws?
We're clutching. I don't think there is such a provision. For me, the closest you get to a solution here is perhaps a directive that goes to the collection agency, which is SARS, and says to them that even though there's a law that says that the VAT rate is 15.5%, please do not implement it in the sense that those that are obviously having to pay over VAT over to SARS can still be able to submit at the 15% rather than the 15.5% rate. That's the closest you get to a solution at the collection agency level. I think politically and constitutionally, we're at a dead end. There's absolutely nothing that you can do before the 1st of May.
Yeah. Interesting to see how it's going to go. I can say, well, I just got an SMS this morning from Nedbank saying it's back to 15%, but we'll just keep calm at this very moment. Khaya, always a pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for joining us. That's Khaya Sithole, economic and political analyst, just breaking down, of course, the big decision that was made early yesterday morning at midnight, that VAT will remain at 15%. Hold on. We don't know what's really going to happen, because Parliament has 2 days. That is going to be a very tight turnaround time. After the break, I'm going to be speaking to Zahir Gallo. Him and a bunch of other bikers are going to be doing a 1,000-kilometer motorcycle ride in solidarity with Palestine. We're going to be discussing that after the break.